Welcome to the next episode of our podcast, Indiana is Ag+Bio+Science. It's presented by AgriNovus Indiana and Inside Indiana Business. I'm Gerry Dick, the host of Inside Indiana Business, also the host of this weekly podcast where we have in-depth conversations with leaders, innovators, and entrepreneurs in Indiana's Ag+Bio+Science sector. It's the sector where food, agriculture, science, and technology all converge. This week, excited to sit down with Stefan Muehlbauer. He's the CEO of Cormo USA. And Stefan, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Cormo was incorporated as a joint venture between Switzerland-based Cormo and Florida-based Sustainable Projects Group, Inc. 2018, you announced plans to put your first U.S. Production plant in Indiana. It's an interesting story. Talk about how this partnership came about in your roles at both Cormo and the Sustainable Projects Group.
We came across with Sustainable Projects Group, which is a company focused exclusively on finding sustainable technology companies across Europe and helping them make the jump across the Atlantic into the United States. We came across Cormo middle of last year, so about 2018, and made the announcement that we were interested in the company, have discussed with the company over in Switzerland, and very quickly realized that for a company that's specialized in taking corn field waste or corn stubs that are left after the harvest and turning it into sustainable products, there really is no other market than the United States. One comparison, Switzerland, for example, where the company is incorporated, produces 112,000 tons of corn per year. Compare this to 380 million tons of corn in the U.S., and you can see that the growth potential for Cormo in its home market, although it's just one small market in Europe, is relatively limited as opposed to the amount of corn that's available in the United States.
So you serve as CEO of both Cormo and Sustainable Projects Group, right?
Hopefully just for the foreseeable future. Right now I've taken over and I've been entrusted by Cormo AG and my board members and shareholders to run both Sustainable Projects Group and Cormo USA while we do the ramp up and while we build our facilities. The hope is, of course, to find a dedicated CEO for the company as we run through these, I would say, pilot scale ramp outs that we see in Indiana and have somebody dedicated for the long term.
Okay, first production facility in the U.S. Here in Indiana, in Rushville, Rush County. Talk about that selection process. You looked at a number of opportunities, a number of locations. Why Indiana? Why Rush County? And talk a little bit about that process.
That's a great question, actually. We started looking at potential fields and potential corn because without corn stubs we have no business with our technology, and also we have the bottleneck that we need to get the corn off the field and process it relatively quickly after harvest. So we started looking, of course, in our home market, which is Florida, and realized very quickly there's corn available. Some areas even harvest twice a year. It would have been enough to start growing the company, but not enough to really do the upscaling. So the next step that came is, of course, when you take a look at corn in the United States, you very quickly come to the Midwest and to the heartland areas. And for us, it's important to find where is the corn stover currently not being used. So we don't want to, for example, compete against states where a lot of the silage is being used for animal feed, which we found in Indiana is largely not the place. There's not very much cattle in the state. And what we liked also is, of course, the geographic location within the country, the logistics. We see it from logistics companies everywhere. Everybody seems to have a hub. So it just seemed to very much fit to pick the state of Indiana. Then the next question, of course, is why Rushville, why Rush County? I have to say, until April 3rd of this year, I've never stepped foot into Indiana. I believe, to the best of my knowledge, I may not have even flown over Indiana before. So it was a very quick decision that we have made, but we were immediately impressed by the professionalism, not only on a state level, but also on the local level. And we particularly liked Rush County because not only do they have a commerce park there and some available facilities that we can use in the short term, but we also just see an entrepreneurial drive in that small community, which is surprising to see for a town with less than 8,000 people.
Yeah, talk a little bit more because I'm interested in that. You talk about that entrepreneurial vibe or feeling there, and a downtown that had some vitality as well.
Absolutely. One of the things that's important for the Cormo technology is that we need to work with the farmers and essentially teach them a new way of harvesting, because instead of going over the field once, taking all of the grain off and leaving the rest there either to be tilled or no tilled later in the year, we have to do two cuts. So the first cut happens, and it needs to happen somewhere between mid-thigh to about hip height, right under the corn. That, of course, is the yellow gold, so to speak, that the farmers are after, and will always be the main profit driver for them on their acreage. But it also requires then to change your machinery, do that cut, come back later on, a couple of weeks later, do that second cut. So for us, it was important to find a farming community that, while we understand, will push some resistance of changing things that worked for decades and decades, but also have enough of an entrepreneurial spirit to say, yes, we will give this a try, which works very well with our business approach, because what you will find is the way we have structured our business, and we'll be harvesting relatively little. We're actually in the process of procuring corn for this harvest season already, which will be in the neighborhood of somewhere between 300 and 500 acres, most likely. So just to calibrate our machines, produce some samples, and have a U.S. proof of concept, so to speak. And therefore, the entrepreneurial spirit, particularly of the farmers, was very important to choosing our location.
As you mentioned, you have you have to have an important relationship with farmers who would provide that waste, the corn opportunity, if you will. How are those conversations going with farmers, especially related to the technology and this business opportunity? Are they seeing this as an important innovation or an opportunity for them?
I think we have a couple of things that help us this year. I think the late start to the planting season and the anticipated relatively poor season, which of course makes everybody worry about their wallet, was one thing that opened many doors for us, because everybody wants to see how can we squeeze more dollars per acre out. That's one thing. Particularly also the trade wars with China are helping us, where everybody is even more worried about it. That is one aspect of it. We found that the farmers were very open to discussions. Of course, there's many questions. What do we have to do exactly? How do we have to change our machinery? How do we have to change our tires? What about row width and so on and so forth that we're working through? Thankfully, we have 2 full-time agronomists working at Cormo AG that have been working on farms longer than I've been alive, actually. So we do have that know-how in-house. One thing that absolutely blew me away from the interest is we were asked to do and the Purdue Extension Office has actually helped tremendously with this. They've put together a farming info night for us in Rushville. I asked before the event started how many people we should expect, and the gentleman helping us out there and organized everything. I mean, we literally just had to show up and speak, which was amazing. I said, well, we're setting up 250 chairs. And I laughed at him, and we had standing room only. So the interest was tremendous. We presented for probably about an hour, and I think we left finally an hour and a half after the presentation was over, because there were so many one-on-one questions afterwards, and the interest was there that we were absolutely just blown away by the openness from farmers, because we expected some critical questions, of course. You're coming into an industry that has been doing the same things for decades and decades, and sometimes generations, just upgrading the technology along the way, but really changing it. We thought we would have more pushback than we did. Hence that stepped-in approach to teach farmers on the ground on a smaller level than hundreds of thousands of acres right from the get-go. And that, I think, was the most surprising and positive experience that we've made thus far.
You talk about Purdue, one of the great assets here in the state of Indiana. I know you've had some interaction with AgriNovus Indiana. As you look at what those assets, that ecosystem, if you will, that exists here in Indiana. Talk a little bit about that and how important that Ag+Bio+Science infrastructure is in Indiana.
When we picked a location for our first plant, and that's one of the things that's important to understand for Cormo, is that due to the production volume, the plant in Rushville will not be the only plant. So we will have a very much of a cluster technology just due to dealing with the volume that comes off the field and going through. But for us, it was important to find a location where farming and agriculture really is in the blood. And part of this is, of course, having organizations like AgriNovus. Purdue is one of the top ag schools in the world. The resources that are available and the know-how that's available is, of course, a cherry on top of the sundae for us to choose this state.
Stefan, how about a little bit about you for folks here in Indiana who are just getting to know the company and getting to know you? Give us a little bit on your background and your path to where you are.
I would say for a company like Cormo, I have a very unorthodox background because I'm an investment banker and economist by trade. I've been working in investment banking basically since I graduated from university, working with numbers, focusing on growth companies, and that has always been my passion. I believe that companies and new technologies are what really drive us forward. That's when I was asked to take over a company like Sustainable Projects Group as CEO, was really drove me to that job, to find innovative companies and buildings. So that's the reason I wake up in the mornings and do what I do. From my background is, you may hear it from my accent, I'm not from the US originally, even though I'm a US citizen. I was born in Germany, raised in Germany, grew up all around the world, including in Asia, area in the New England region, New York. Lived in Florida for a long time, so I'm kind of a child of the world, so to speak. So many people say, wow, you're coming out to the farms and talking now about corn stover and harvesting and row spacing and so on and so forth. It's always been a personal interest of mine, and as we've taken this investment into Cormo and realizing how important it is not only to use acreage for food production, but also to come up with some sustainable solutions that really come on a large scale. That's really where my knack for farming, so to speak, is coming in on that side, and I'm learning many things on the fly. So it's nice to have a very strong team in the ag side. So I'm purely, long answer short, I'm coming from a business and financial world.
What's next? You just announced plans for the Indiana operation earlier this year, but it's obviously you're in growth mode. What's next for Cormo?
Well, what's next is actually a very exciting time for us, because for us it means that the first cuts of corn are currently happening. I spent the weekend driving around Rush County in the area and looking at the fields and just seeing where do we stand. So our main focus for the very short term is, of course, a couple of different things. Getting our machinery in place to process this harvest. We have some machinery that's coming in the next couple of weeks to start processing the product as it comes off of the field. And that really is our core focus at the very short term. Getting into production, making a U.S. proof of concept. That is actually one of the things that we had underestimated. Cormo AG has been producing on a commercial scale with their pilot plant for the past 3 years. When you come into the United States, in many ways, it's like we're a startup. Whether you're talking to farmers, whether you're talking to banks, whether you're talking to many other institutions as well. So this for us is the eye on the prize moment, so to speak, to really produce some tefa, which is our peat moss replacement, and BAPS, which we use for building materials and soil additives and fertilizer retention, and really making a proof of concept here in the States. So that's where everybody's eyes on the prize to source that corn. We believe we have all the corn that we need for this first process. Actually meeting with farmers this week to go through the cutting procedures in person. So very exciting times.
Stefan, welcome to Indiana.
Thank you very much.
It's been a real treat to have you on the podcast this week. Stefan Muehlbauer is the CEO of Cormo USA, and it's been great to have him join us this week. Another great example of innovation in the ag-bioscience space here in Indiana. And thank you for joining us on this podcast, the Ag+Bio+Science podcast. We're a weekly production partnership between AgriNovus Indiana and Inside Indiana Business. And before we sign off, AgriNovus has opened up registration for its 2019 Ag+Bio+Science Innovation Summit. That is November 20th. To learn more and to register for that November 20th Ag+Bio+Science Innovation Summit, all you have to do is visit agrinovusindiana.com/summit. Thanks for joining us on this edition of the podcast. I'm Gerry Dick. We'll see you next time.
This podcast is a product of Inside Indiana Business, hosted by Gerry Dick, produced by Libby Fritz and Joe Ullery, and was recorded on location at Launch Fishers. More people get Indiana business news from Inside Indiana Business than any other source.